then actually an opportunity came up to move back to the Caribbean and to give back, to work with a private equity fund started by Michael Lee Chin and a number of other partners. And I jumped at the opportunity.
President and CEO of First Global Bank, the vibrant Mariame McIntosh Robinson, joins us this week on the Trailblazers. Stay tuned for this impactful episode. Hey everyone, I am Tamara McKayle, producer and host of the Trailblazers series. Remember to hit the notification bell right below, subscribe, like, comment, and share.
I took a 75% beautiful black X5 to drive in a Tita, a second hand.
And Oprah grabbed my hand. She was like, all right, show
One
me.
thing that I learned from Steve Harvey's office, I remember he had gotten fired from that particular radio station.
If you don't get single-minded and push certain things, they never get accomplished.
Yes, you have to be resolute in your purpose.
That's right. And you have to put a timeline on it. That must be done by.
Meet Mariame McIntosh Robinson. She joined First Global Bank in Jamaica as president and CEO in 2016. Prior to this, she was a private equity investor for 7 years, where she was a partner at Portland Private Equity. Maryam also worked as a strategy consultant for 8 years with McKinsey & Company Atlanta office and Bain & Company New York office, where she was a manager prior to joining Portland. She currently serves as a trustee on United Way Worldwide Board and several private and public boards in Jamaica and Barbados. She's also a vice president of the Private Sector Organisation of Jamaica, PSOJ. Maryam is also the board chair of Teach Caribbean, an educational NGO she co-founded in 2006 with seed financing from Rhodes Trust to provide access to quality education for economically disadvantaged youth. Maryam has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from MIT, an MBA from Harvard Business School, and a Master of Philosophy in Economics from Oxford University, where she attended as a Rhodes Scholar. She is married and has 2 children and is certainly a trailblazer.
Hi, Maryam. A pleasure to have you joining us on the Trailblazers, or joining me rather on the Trailblazers. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Tamara. It's a pleasure to be here. Very good to be here.
Yes, definitely. So you are the, as we introduced you, you are the president and CEO of First Global Bank.
Yes.
You have a career specifically devoted in financing. You used to live in the States, all of that. So yeah. First question, tell us how your journey started. Tell us about your early years growing up, because I know you had migrated at one point. So talk us through that.
Yeah, so I grew up here. I went to prep school here, went to Hillel, and then I went to Immaculate High. And then actually my dad at the time was doing a exec management course at Harvard. He used to work for Alcan Jamaica, and they'd sent him on a 2-week course. And he came back from that course and said, my daughter should go to MIT. In those days, I didn't know what MIT was, apart from watching Family Matters, which I don't know if you've ever heard of. Urkel in Family Matters wants to go to... Yeah, nerd. And so he actually encouraged me to apply to a number of universities, not just in Jamaica, but also abroad. And it's through applying to those universities I got into quite a few, and chose MIT because my favorite subject in life was physics, and I wanted to be an engineer, and it was one of the best schools for engineering. So I went abroad at that time in the 90s. And after school, after college, I ended up working in a field called management consulting. In the 90s, management consulting was really all the rage at that time. A lot of young people were trying to get into that industry because it allows you to take on a fairly senior role at a young age in terms of problem solving, client impact, communication, working with teams, and it's project based. So you go from one hard problem that you're solving, serving a client, to the next one, to the next one. So it was a very hard industry to get into. A lot of people tried, and I was fortunate to get into that. I did that for about 8 years, punctuated with 2 stints in grad school. I was working at the entry level and wanted to go to graduate school because I was doing some of the post-grad roles on my cases, and needed to have that formal graduate education. My dad told me about a Rhodes Scholarship. Again, I'd actually never heard of it before.
Yes, so stick up in, because that's actually what I wanted to touch on next. You know, I understand that you were a Rhodes Scholar, but you're telling me you didn't even know what it was.
I didn't, because in those days you couldn't Google, and you really had those big encyclopedias and you'd have to flip through to see what is a Rhodes Scholarship. No, they used to publicize it in the schools, but for whatever reason, I had not actually heard of it. So I did my research, applied, got in, and went to Oxford. So I did an MPhil in economics then, and then went back into consulting, and then went to Harvard Business School, and then back into consulting. So I was in consulting for quite a number of years, even though I'd done engineering. And then actually an opportunity came up to move back to the Caribbean and to give back, to work with a private equity fund started by Michael Lee Chin and a number of other partners. And I jumped at the opportunity because, again, I saw it as a new field. I saw it as a way to give back and live in the region in a way that I hadn't in my professional years. And so did that for 7 years. In the process, got married, moved back home while working with the private equity fund, and was sitting on the board of a bank, First Global at the time. When the CEO left to a greater opportunity, the board looked at me and said, "Why don't you be the CEO?" It was like me. But so I joined First Global in 2016, and the rest is history. It's been a fantastic experience, both from a learning experience about what it truly means to aspire to be the best leader you can be, but it's also been a very inspiring experience, just getting a lot of inspiration from learning about the journeys of my team members. I think oftentimes people who are in these leadership roles, people want to talk to us and find out our story, but I've been blown away by people's stories generally that you won't see in the newspaper and you won't see on TV, etc. But as a people, we're a very resilient people.
Definitely. And I mean, you just sort of just gave me, you know, everything in a quick nutshell. And I have like so many layers that I want to uncover. But I just love your energy. But I liked how you just quickly brushed over Oxford, because you're like, oh yeah, I applied, I didn't know what it was. And then I did it for like, you know, several years. But tell us about that experience. I mean, going to Oxford, you know, getting a Rhodes Scholarship. I know at the time you didn't know, but eventually you would have known that it was, you know, it's a prestigious scholarship. So what was that experience like for you?
Yes, I always look back on Oxford, even a couple of years out. That was one of those life-changing experiences for me. The biggest reason, to be honest, is that it's the first time at that time, when I was in my 20s, that I'd been around so many people who their goal was to like change the world. Like they dreamt big, they wanted to have an impact. And you have to understand, I was coming out of a university environment where people went to MIT and then they wanted to get great jobs and make a lot of money. I was coming out to the US and it was all about let's make money, maximize wealth for ourselves and our families. And when I went to Oxford, there were people from all over the world. And when you listen to everybody's story, it wasn't about making the most money or being the most powerful or anything like that. It really was about how can you have an impact on the world. And that's where my whole passion for education and development, which I always had in my head, actually started to now come alive on paper. And then from there, it actually was the genesis of me starting an educational NGO called Teach Caribbean. It came out of the Oxford years. So I always look back on those Oxford years and I'm truly grateful, because I don't think I would have been given that space to dream and really believe I can have this impact had I just stayed on the engineering business path in the US. You know, no fault for the US, but I don't think that I would have been allowed that space to grow in that dimension.
Definitely. But backtrack as well to the US, because you mentioned doing engineering and all of that. And I'm sure it must have been an amazing time for you. Tell us about that experience.
Right. So in the early 90s, went off to college at MIT, did electrical engineering and a minor in econ. My goal was actually to come back to Jamaica and work for JPS. That was my goal. So the first summer, I did a research project on campus. The second summer, though, I worked with GE, General Electric, in upstate New York. And I worked on a project on the ultrasound machine, presented to my bosses at the end of the summer. And they're like, you're so personable. Like, we're going to put you next summer into the business side, which is in Connecticut, so different from upstate New York. So my junior year, I was looking to go back to GE and their business unit called GE Finance. And I got the opportunity to apply to a program called Scholarship for educational opportunity, abbreviated as SEO. SEO is one of those programs that gets minority students from all over the country, and you didn't have to be American, you just had to be minority, right? Persons of color, but all colors, because Indian, Chinese, Black, Hispanic. And they put you into industries, consulting, investment, banking, asset management. Very difficult industries to get into. And that's how I was first introduced to management consulting. I did it for my junior summer. And when I was going back into my senior year, I said, I'm going to try and get into consulting, if not engineering. And that really changed the trajectory of my life. I think I like being an engineer because of the problem solving. I liked being a scientist because of trying to figure things out. I did not like the labs. I did not like the patience that one had to exhibit to build a radio from scratch. You know, like and we had to do things like that. I wasn't as into that. I was more about the problem solving and the communication of the answer to people. And so I found business was a better fit for me. And that's how I ended up moving into consulting. And then I worked in the US and just kind of worked with McKinsey first, went back to business school, then went to New York. The Bain office in New York was just starting up, one of the top firms. So I ended up going to Bain. And I learned a lot about people, about how people saw people, how to work with people, what it meant to be a team player. And I would say that the one thing that allowed me to be successful in corporate America, looking back again, was this idea of coachability. And what does that really mean? Now, no matter what, right? You know, I always had this belief that if I'm not performing well, it means there's something I'm missing, you know, as opposed to the system is against me or people should just tell me, I'm going to go out and get that feedback and I'm going to incorporate the feedback. And some feedback you don't have to agree with, and you should never change who you are. Like the Lord brought us into this world with all our different personalities and strengths and development areas, right? But the goal was to ensure that you were clear on how persons were perceiving you and whether you were meeting or exceeding expectations. And if you weren't, what action items you needed to take in very practical terms to do that. I was pretty good at that. So that coachability allowed me to always excel because I was always clear on the expectations. And if anything was falling short, I'd be able to be very practical about what needed to be done. So that coachability has carried me through a lot of situations, even here at the bank. You know, when I first came in, I think as leaders, the biggest thing is get the feedback, you know, and then
and before we even move on further to the banking experience, because I like the word that you mentioned, coachability. I think that's going to be a key word throughout this interview. But I know, for example, especially as a minority working in the US, did you at any time feel like you were, you know, had any setbacks because of that?
Right. So here's the thing. When you're going through it, you don't realize it because not like people come up to you and say, you're Black, so I'm going to keep you back this time. I'm going to promote. You don't know that. You're just on your journey, working hard, getting feedback. I'm generally a very upbeat person, so I had a lot of support in the different work environments that I was in. So I was very happy with that. But in Bain, New York, I was the first female at the time, Black female, to make manager. And what that means is the manager role is a role right before partner. You hang out at the manager role for 4 years, and it's a 4-year run to partner. I actually left a year and a half in to go join Portland because this opportunity came up. But what I realized is when I got that seat at the table, right, the concept of the seat at the table came alive for me. Because what it meant is that, you know, I'll give you a very specific example. An analyst had started, and I knew one of her family members, and they said, look out for this person. She had just graduated from Yale undergrad. Quiet, humble, smart young woman. And she was living right across the river in New Jersey because she thought, you know, New York is so busy. She'll just take the ferry across because our office was on the west side. And she was on a case, and the equivalent Caucasian male who is in my class, so my friend, my acquaintance, you know, I asked him how she was doing, and he said, I'm not so sure if she's happy. You know, I was like, what? When I talked to her, she's bouncing off the walls, loves being in New York, grateful for her experience. And when I probed him more, he was actually going to knock her down in terms of performance, not on brains, because she's very smart and her clients loved her, but on what they call fit. I'm not sure if she's the right fit. She doesn't seem happy. And when I spoke to her to kind of probe, I realized that she had shared, because she's just innocent, young, she had shared, you know, that when they asked how was New York, and because she's very calm and quiet, she said, it's fine, you know, I live in New Jersey, it's too busy. And that gave the impression that she was not happy or a good fit. And so easily, just because there's a lack of shared or common understanding with this individual, my colleague who was white male was going to just be like, yeah, she cannot be middle bucket. So it's a very minor example because we quickly course corrected that. And I was able to give her feedback about how you come across in the office. And, you know, when you're sharing things you don't like, you can't be just Debbie Downer unless you're really. And so having representation at the table matters for minorities. And it's sitting at that table, I realized how much discrimination exists. Still does. As a people, you know, the human race, we discriminate. You know, people discriminate on age, on gender, on race, on religion. It really exists. But what we have to do is find a way to ensure that we're being as objective as possible when we're making decisions that impact other people's lives, notwithstanding that bias is built into our heads as we go through life. So I found that helpful.
And I liked how you mentioned, you know, because you got the opportunity with Michael Leachin's company, you came to Jamaica now and being a partner as well at Portland Equity. So I'm, you know, trying to figure out how critical is having the right connections or having connections as well, because while you are obviously qualified, but your name went before you as well.
Right. So, yeah, so I wouldn't even term it connections, you know, I would term it relationships. And, you know, I'll give an example of what I did when I was younger. Again, I was just doing these things, but now that I'm a bit older and more experienced, and I look back, I realize what worked and obviously what didn't, but what really worked. One of the things I encourage all persons, whether you're, you know, what level regardless of level and age, when you come into an organization and you have someone who's a head of a unit or head of an office or head of the business, go to their assistant and get time on their calendar for 30 minutes twice a year. You're entitled to it. You are a team member, and that leader cannot do well without your input, your motivation, your presence. So I did that when I was at McKinsey. Everywhere I've worked, I've actually done that. Not trying to network just because I want to know what's in their head. I'm going to work for you, and you need to know what's going on. This is when I was in my 20s. And each time I've done that, it's allowed a lot more people to recognize who is Maryam, and then they would give me opportunities. So I think the idea of forming relationships in your own way, right? Everyone has their way of doing it. It should not be forced. It should be very authentic and organic, but you should not be completely, let me work hard and people will notice me. No. Work hard, but also share with people what your aspirations are, what your dreams are, what your challenges are. And you can actually share with people in a way that doesn't say you're networking, but you just want to maybe get their advice and hear about their story. And people have a way of what I've found through the years is when you reach out to somebody just to hear their story, just so you can have a connection point with them, people will always ask you about yourself. Like leaders and other people, they're just so happy that someone has reached out to them. They're like, tell me about yourself. And they talk, and then they can share points that may be relevant for you. So yes, I think half of it is having the competence, but a bigger piece as you go through life and get more and more experienced is really about the ability to connect with people. As you say, you call it the connections and the relationships that you build.
And how do you know when it's the right time to jump and take an opportunity? Because you have done that so many times.
Yes, so it's very spiritual for me. It's very spiritual for me. So when I came out of undergrad and I was deciding I wanted to go into management consulting, the offer that came felt right. And looking back, it was probably I don't think there would have been any other offer in that industry. I would have been in a tangential industry. So I always think it's very spiritual, like the Lord meant for me to be there at that time. And that changed my trajectory. When I ended up so I was at McKinsey for a while, actually, for 2 years, and I had gotten into McKinsey at the post-grad level, but coming out of Oxford, but I'd also gotten into Harvard Business School coming out of Oxford. And I said, well, I could go to business school and spend more money, or I could just go to the job I would have gotten coming out of business school. So I went to the job, but guess what? I found that I was on the easier cases because I had come in through the track called the Advanced Professional Degree, the APD track. And all my MBA classmates were getting these hardcore cases, and I'm driven by hardcore problem solving and hard cases, right? So an example of a hard, easy case, just to give you some context, would be going to work for an organization to define their mission. That's a meaningful case. You do a lot of interviews, you get people into focus groups, and you come up with mission and you present to the board. A hard case is something like a Japanese air conditioner manufacturer wants to enter the US market. How should they do it? That's like hardcore. Now, you know, there's all these modeling and primary research, and I found I wasn't getting that. So I decided to go back, reopen my application to business school since I'd gotten in before, so I could get a more structured instruction in business. That's how I ended up leaving there. So that was very spiritual again, because, you know, just by somebody at McKinsey at the time, one of my mentors who had gone to HBS, wrote a recommendation for me, to get one recommendation. And then I got in. So I said, well, if I got in, I should just go. Then when I was at Bain, my goal was to be a partner in consulting. I loved consulting. I was going to stay. And then a friend of mine, hadn't spoken to him in 18 months. He was one of my friends from undergrad. And he said, I know a firm that's looking for someone to join their private equity shop. And you're one of my Caribbean friends. You should talk to them. And the rest is history, because I'd met Mike when I was in HBS. And one of the partners went to school with my dad anyway. So I ended up going there. And what I told Bain was I was going to go for a year, check it out, right? And if I don't like it, I'll go right back to Bain. Because when you're a manager, that's the time when you can go off and do something to come back. And then I stayed there for 7 years, and we did Fund 1, fully invested out of Fund 1. We started fundraising for Fund 2. And so that's what I was doing. And then this opportunity came where the CEO of the bank at the time went on to be the CEO of a much larger company. And it wasn't sudden, but we didn't plan for it. And then the board said, Maryam, why don't you do it? And then I spoke to my partners at Portland, like, what do you think? I have strategy experience or consulting experience. I have investing experience, but I've never run anything, you know, that's operating experience. And through a lot of discussions, we decided that it would be a good move. And that's why I say it's very spiritual. So it's not that you go looking, it's like some point the Lord just says, boom, you need to do that.
Wow, that's amazing. You are definitely passionate and love what you do. It comes out in your energy and your enthusiasm. And how critical is that, you know, because, you know, you love finance and you love business and engineering.
Yes. Well, the thing is, I kind of like work. That's the thing about me. So I have to manage that. You know, I like problem solving. I like difficult things, as long as when you get on the other side, there's impact. I'm very driven by impact and purpose. In fact, I think if I didn't have work in my life and no impact or purpose, I'd be like, who is Maryam? So that's a whole nother thing, right? Thank goodness I have a family with kids. Create the balance. But the truth is that, yeah, I'm very, very driven by impact, by purpose. And I think that, I think it's important to really know that about yourself, to ensure that you're not overdoing it. But yeah, that's what drives me. I enjoy what.
I like how you mentioned, and I'm looking at the role of mentors, because several times so far you've mentioned your dad and the role that your dad played in pushing you to, you know, apply for the scholarship and to do this and to do that. So I'm assuming, is he your mentor? Or
yes, one of. So my parents they have very different personalities, and they impacted my education journey differently. Neither of them were very overbearing at all, in fact. But they were anytime I had questions, I'd go to them and they'd give me whatever resources were required for education. That's how we were raised. And I remember being in the US my first year in college, and I wanted to get a job, and they weren't giving international students jobs as easily. You needed to get a green card. Again, first time I'd heard of a green card. So I called my parents and I was like, hey guys, listen, in order for me to get a job, I need a green card. So can you just organize that? I need it by next week. They were like, okay, we'll look into it. They were like, no, it doesn't quite work like that, Maryam. Can't get your green card. I think it was the first time I was like, what? This is impacting my education journey. On a serious note, Daddy and Mommy have been mentors to me. My dad is a bit more on the education side. What I find about when you meet people and they're kind of ahead of their time.
Yes.
Thing about my father is he very casual about how he suggests these things. That's the first thing. So he was more like, I'm suggesting this because I know you can do it. And then I'd say, really, I can do it? So I never really had as much confidence in myself for these moments as he did. And he's not an overbearing person. He's just a very confident, he has very clear on who he is, and he believes that anything is possible. So I think being raised by parents like that, and then my mom, she had a very strong work ethic. I don't know how she raised all three of us and worked all these years. And me, I'm still trying to just juggle. I have a much greater appreciation for women, but in particular my mom, and how she managed to have a corporate career as well as be present for us as kids. And so I think because of the both of them, they give you this belief that's very subconscious. It was never explicitly told to us. It was very subconscious about the fact that whatever you're given, you do the best with. You must always be respectful to others. You must never boast. You must never, ever lie or steal or any of those things. Integrity was a big thing to them. And that's what came through with all of us, the three of us, me and my two siblings.
Wow. And your career now, I mean, looking at what's happening now in Jamaica, it's very interesting times in terms of the commercial banking sector. As you know, recent news that we now have at least 4 female heads who are, you know, heads of president and CEO of banks, and you're one of them. Congratulations. So how do you feel to be, you know, about at a time like this?
Well, first of all, let's just keep it real. Like, Audrey's appointment to run all of Scotia Group Jamaica is a big deal. And when I was coming into the industry, Jackie Sharp was running Scotia Jamaica. So, I mean, we really have to say hands off to Scotia and to FGB, because there was another female president ahead of me as well. So I think Audrey's appointment is very inspiring. And it's funny because since she's been appointed, she will be appointed for January 1st. So it's pending. All these people are like, congrats, Maryam, you know, now we have like gender parity. I'm like, I didn't do anything, but I'm proud of her, right? But, you know, I think in all seriousness, Tamara, you know, this question about how I feel about it, I really believe in the power of diversity and gender balance. Gender balance matters more from a diversity standpoint in the Caribbean when it comes to executive teams, when it comes to boards, when it comes to persons who have to make weighty decisions. I think it's better for decision making. I think it's better for innovation. I think it's better for culture, and certainly better for financial performance. So I think when I surround myself with people who are not all like me, I find that it pushes me to be a better leader. In terms of just how much women are showing up in the workplace at all levels. And by the way, you know, when you go all the way to the highest level, there's the associated accountability that comes with it. So it's not like you get to the top and you're like, yeah, no, there's accountability. Like, we have to show up and deliver, right? But I think that we have to realize, and I've reflected on this over the years, the fact that a lot of people who came before me and before the current leaders right now, they paved the way for us. And it's a big point because sometimes it's kind of cliche, you know, people just say that. But I recall when Mom was coming through, I've heard stories from older women who told me what it was like, even in banking. Apparently in banking, for example, you'd have to wear stockings. You know, if anybody knows anything about me, I mean, just stockings would be unheard of. You know, when I started in 2016, my hair was like this. I'm not very stylish when it comes to hair, I must tell you. But it was like such a talking point in a cool way. And over the years, people have come to me and said, look, Miss Robinson or Maryam, I've cut off my hair because of you. And I'm like, what? You know, I mean, I suppose we're transitioning to a point where 10 years from now, when somebody does that, you don't even have to tell anybody about it because it's become the norm.
Yes.
And so I just appreciating where we've come from, to allow me showing up as Maryam, because I didn't have to do anything different. This is Maryam. I've shown up and I've gotten it good, right? I've been able to come in as a CEO, try to build out a team who will now follow and have the vision and, you know, be a good culture where people feel like they can speak up. That didn't come overnight, you know, and again, that coachability and the ability to really reflect on how you impact people and what you need to tweak to ensure that persons feel comfortable really striving for their full potential. That was a good learning, you know, in 2016 when I came in. It's been one of the best benefits of coming into this leadership role.
Definitely, we're winding down, but I like that point that you mentioned in terms of the fact that you showed up as yourself, you showed up as you, as Maryam, and that speaks to you being authentic. And how critical is that? Because, you know, sometimes people feel like they have to maybe try to be like somebody else. So how critical is it to be a leader, but at the same time to be authentic?
I think being a leader is a very dynamic experience. It's a very tough experience at times. And if you're also trying to be something you think people should be, it would make it even harder. You know, if you strip back all the layers of what it is to be a leader and, you know, people are counting on you and, you know, when you do well, you share it with everybody, but when you're not doing great, you have to be able to take the punches for the team. It's a very lonely role, right? It's a lonely role. So before you even get into that role, you have to be very clear on who you are. You know, what does it mean to be Maryam? What means the most to Maryam? What's Maryam great at? What's Maryam not so good at? So she should try not to put herself in those situations so that doesn't come out as much, right? Because we're all human beings. And when you're authentic, you don't have to focus on changing things about yourself. That's so difficult to do, right? You're now focused on the business and the team and the vision and what you're what you're aspiring to move towards. So I think as a leader, it's very important to be authentic because you're going to be making tough decisions at times. You're going to be upsetting people at times. You're going to be holding people accountable that can feel uncomfortable at times. And if people know that this is just Maryam, no man, this is Maryam. It don't matter who is in front of her. It doesn't matter what. She's authentic. It's easier for people to predict how you're going to respond to something, but feel comfortable that you will support them. So that's my thinking on authenticity when it comes to leadership.
My penultimate question, as a wife and a mother, I mean, your husband is involved in politics as well, and then you have such a major responsibility. How do you create any sort of balance? Is that even possible for you?
Well, the biggest thing on balance is two things. One, a support structure, like a support infrastructure, I should say, and two, communication. Right. So if it was just me and my husband, it would be super easy, actually. You know, we carve out time for ourselves anyway. We have busy jobs, but we like being busy. So it would be fine. When you add kids to the mix, though, suddenly the communication has to go way up and the support structure, you know, you really have to invest in that. And, you know, I joke about the fact that when I had my son 6 years ago, I've never cared in those first months about my husband's schedule. I'd be like, okay, Jules, so you coming home early today? Who going to PJ? So what, you know, like, I just never cared about that. Then I was like, no, I need to invest in somebody to help me so we don't have to be micromanaging each other's schedules around looking after this newborn. But the truth is that the balance, I think with COVID-19, one of the things I've realized about COVID-19 is I thought I was pretty balanced with family/work, right? My friends will get in when I could. I'm very extroverted, so I draw a lot of energy from people. So I felt like I was pretty good at, you know, work and then family and friends. But what COVID-19 has shown me is that I was not as present as a parent as I thought I was. I think with COVID and with homeschooling, you know, you have no choice but to be present, like truly present in your young child's life. And so whether that means you know, like my son is 6 now, and my thinking subconsciously was that when he gets a bit older, I'll get more into the homework, you know, starting for PEP, we're gonna have to, you know, get into things because I love teaching, you know, but he's 5, like the school takes care of it. And it's been a pleasure to really know what he's learning. I can tell you what he learned today, right? I was home earlier this morning, I could hear, right, what he's learning today. And I think that has been both a blessing and a struggle for us as young parents of young kids. The blessing is that we're much more involved in our children's learning, right? I mean, it takes me half an hour to upload his homework. I have to take a picture of it, then I have to like send it to myself, then download it to my computer, then upload it to the app. I mean, it's a lot of work, right? But the struggle though has been for not everybody can invest in infrastructure in the same way. And you are constantly juggling work and the child. And that has become more difficult because the child is in your space. So at Grace Kennedy and at First Global Bank, including First Global Bank, one of the things we said, because we have a number of executives at Grace Kennedy who have young children, who are at very senior levels, you know, something as simple as doing a call. If the child photobombs the call, you say, hey, child, how are you? Don't let the person feel bad. Like you literally just say, you just go with it. And then you get back to the work. And that cultural signal allows for more inclusive workplaces as we navigate COVID-19. So COVID-19 is getting me more balanced in a very academic way. It's quite interesting, or practical way. But if you had asked me this before COVID-19, I'd have been like, oh, Tamara, I'm doing great at it. But COVID showed me that I wasn't.
Well, it's a blessing in disguise in some ways, right? So my final question for you, as an accomplished young woman, you know, in a major position and always, you know, throughout your life been a trailblazer, tell us maybe 1 or 2 or even 3 rules for success that you can leave with our viewers?
So the first one, in my humble opinion, is become very comfortable with yourself. So it's get to know yourself and become truly self-aware. You know, self-aware is such a big piece. Once you get that self-awareness and self-confidence, then you can handle pretty much anything. So that's the first thing. Number 2, really develop and hone that skill of coachability. It literally means that people could tell you whatever, both on the good, you know, the positive feedback, because as women, we're not so good at taking positive feedback. If someone says, Maryam, you did a great job, I'd be like, okay, thanks, let's move on. No, you should be like, really? Thank you so much. So accept the positive feedback, but on the constructive feedback, ask the questions, but ask for the examples, ask for what could have been better in a nice way so people are not afraid to tell you, right? So that whole coachability is also about how do you get information in about yourself. And as you move up the ladder, you'll be surprised, people don't want to tell you. So you have to really develop that skill of when they tell you, they see action, right? So that's the second piece. And then the third thing I would say, and is to your point, half the battle, especially as you continue up the ladder, if you will, in your particular journey, is that half the battle is competence, just technical ability. The other half is the ability to relate to people and connect to people. And so that's the relationship building in the most formal sense. People call it the networking, but hone those skills. And I will say you do not have to be an extrovert to network. You can be an introvert who really doesn't want to be around a lot of people, and you still can have a one-on-one Zoom call. I'm going to check in with so-and-so and set it up for 3 weeks from now. And after that 30 minutes, you have now furthered a relationship. So any personality can build relationships and connect. So those are my 3 points of advice.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I mean, you are a ball of energy. I wish we had a longer time. I can't believe the time finished already. I love your personality and continue to keep up the amazing work.
You too, Tamara. You too. Keep doing what you're doing. Good job.
Thank you.
And join the Trailblazers family for weekly inspirational episodes every Sunday evening.